take two eyes to make a pair. Brother, we can't quit until we get our share. Say it loud. Say it loud. One more time. Say it.
Hello, hello. Ooh, that's loud. All right, coming on a couple minutes late today. It's Monday night. It's 10 p.m. It's past 10 p.m. It's past your bedtime. Welcome to another edition of Say It Loud. My name is John Terry. I am the producer of this show. The things that you will hear over the next 50 minutes represent the views of Say It Loud and the people making them. All opinions and quotations in no way represent River West Radio and are the sole responsibility of the producer, guests, and callers. River West Radio is not liable for any legal issues arising from the content of this program. As I said, this is Say It Loud, and I'm going to do a show this evening, one that has been in the making for quite some time, a brief history of the blues. This is going to be part one of my brief history of the blues, and it's going to be impossible to really cover the full spectrum, but I'm going to try to, in about 100 minutes, give you all somewhat of a history of the blues. So when I say the blues, what am I talking about? Perhaps the greatest, maybe the sole American art form, true American art form. Fantastic music, stuff that I love. But when I say the blues, I think that a lot of people out there, probably the first thing that you start to think of would be stuff like Eric Clapton and other British invasion bands. A lot of people really put this stuff in the 1960s or even later, and I want to take us all the way back. So I am going to start this exploration, as it were, of the blues in Africa, actually, and thinking about people who were kidnapped and taken to America to become slaves in the United States. So there are a few different ways that we can think about this. Like I said, a lot of people maybe think of 60s rock and roll, and that's their entry to the blues. So a lot of people have heard of Robert Johnson because Eric Clapton heard of Robert Johnson and loved him. We're going to get to that at some point. I really don't know how far we'll get tonight, but we'll finish next week. But we're going to try to give us a much better picture of what actually is the blues and all of the things that went into them. And so, like I said, I'm going to start in Africa and the slave trade. And so there's a few things that we have to remember when we're thinking about the slave trade. And one of them is that there was not an undifferentiated mass of people coming to the United States, that actually American slaves came from all over Africa, and this is something that sort of only happens in America. We do this to several continents, Asia especially, and Africa, is that you really aren't an African until you come to the United States, or you really aren't an Asian until you come to the United States, right? You are from Chad, or you are from the Congo, or you are from Vietnam or China, etc., etc. So we have this idea that it was Africans who came to America, but it was not a homogeneous mass coming to America. There were several ethnic groups. They covered a large portion of a huge continent that was culturally and economically diverse. So there were people who were living in river cultures. There were people living in mountain cultures, desert cultures, jungle cultures, etc., etc. So we have to start with this idea that a lot of different slaves who came to the United States brought with a bunch of different traditions, a bunch of different cultures. This was not sort of one group that came. But in the United States, and the United States has a unique history, like several countries have a very unique history with slavery, and we have a variety of different experiences: Brazil, the Caribbean, even the Deep South compared to the Plantation South, Indigo, and things like that, New Orleans. It's very, very diverse, but in the United States, primarily a mixture of West African and Central African slaves came to the United States, and there was actually differentiation among them. So it's not even that simple, right? So what we have is West African slaves who were, for all sorts of pseudoscientific reasons, sort of experiences of slaveholders or whatever. Slaveholders were really, we have this sort of idea right now that this is just like a group of Africans coming to the United States and that it didn't really matter. Slaveholders were extremely keenly aware of where their slaves were coming from and what they did before they came. So we have this mixture, West African and Central African. Well, West Africans were primarily working in they were living in cultures where they had a lot of skills that were very useful around the home at the plantation. So basket makers, blacksmiths, a lot of people, and you see this actually in a lot of last names today that have carried through, Wheelwright, Carter, Smith, all of these names that have actually survived were these skilled slaves, and West Africans were preferred often for these kind of skills. So they were around the house quite a bit, around the big house. This would be in the plantation south. And so they had a lot more contact with whites initially because they were the house servants. But the majority of slaves were Central Africans, and they were field slaves, and so they really wouldn't have much contact with plantation owners or the people running the plantation. And so they incubate this sort of the vernacular and the religious and the secular kind of traditions that end up making up a lot of the blues, but they also have this contact with these West Africans. So the majority are Central Africans with a different kind of culture and different kind of set of skills, and West Africans who would be more likely to be around the house. But there is a tradition that came from West Africa and actually elsewhere and several places in Africa, and this is common actually around the world, that there is, like the English troubadour, there is the African griot, who is a sort of songster, oftentimes what would be the equivalent of an early, like an actor, a jester, a joker, a poet, singer, often played instruments, but this griot tradition. So how do you maintain oral tradition, or how do you maintain tradition when you don't have writing? You do it orally. What's a good way to pass down traditions and make sure that they last orally? Make them rhyme, put them into a song, make it enjoyable. And we have these sort of songs too that sort of inculcate us in America, learning Yankee Doodle Dandy, for example, when you're a kid in elementary school. So there's this really common tradition of doing that, but the griot is this special, had a special place in African culture, and what they did, and this is really important for the blues, is that they would sing criticisms that you would not otherwise speak, and this was an African tradition. So you would sing about complaints and things like that that you'd maybe not talk about, which really becomes an important part of the blues. And so Africans have all this very diverse musical culture, but it's slavery that gives Africans the blues, and that's where we start, and that's why really America is the home of the blues. But there's a long development, and I can't get into everything here, but because I kind of want to sort of move through this and try and do it in a couple of weeks. But we can think of the blues development as a mixture of all sorts of things. So we really don't, we don't get anything on tape until Thomas Edison comes around, and we learn how to record things, and this is late 1890s, but really before the first black performers are recorded. You're looking at the early 20th century, and so we don't really know what it was happening for a long time before that other than written music, and a lot of course the music that slaves performed was not written, and there's a lot of folk traditions, Celtic traditions and everything like that that actually weren't written either. But the blues developed from this mixture, and we really kind of have to tell from going back from what survived on tape and other sort of circumstantial evidence and the kind of traditions that we are used to. So, but going back, there's a strong gospel tradition, black Christianity, much different than white Christianity. Music is really, really, really important, and there's an emphasis in black slave religion on the Old Testament, which makes sense, right? Because we have the story of Pharaoh and the Israelites, David and Goliath. These things are really appealing for a group in a position that slaves are in, right? They have no power, basically, and they're sort of a downtrodden group. So the Old Testament really appeals. And I mean, the story is about a group of slaves who free themselves. And then you also have secular folklore, and these are stories of trickster heroes, a lot of people who challenged whites, and this mixture of European folk music. And these tricksters, what I mean by that is usually these are folks who can't often stand up and fight, even though they could physically, beat somebody up or something like that. They often, it would be deadly for them to stand up and fight. So the stories focus on, one example is the boll weevil, which is really shows up in a lot of blues songs. A little bug that destroys a cotton crop, or a little hare that outsmarts the farmer, these animals, or the fox that outsmarts the farmer. It's really siding for the underdog, and this is really, really common, and becomes really common for the early songs for blues. And this European folk music, like I said, there's a lot of contact, more than probably people tend to recognize, between European and African cultures. And there's European folk music, and this ballad structure actually influences a lot of the songs that end up being the early blues. But really where this comes from is work songs and field hollers. And like I said, I started a little late, talking too much. We're going to get into a little bit of music here. Just listen to these. These are these kind of chants and hollers, and we have this thing called the arhuli. And when I was a kid, I had no idea what this meant, but we'd say the hoolies are out when people were partying, and you'd hear people whooping and hollering. These sort of hoops and hollers that people have always done get sort of transformed into what would be early blues. And so this is, again, like I said, nothing is recorded until the early 20th century. And so a lot of this is kind of guesswork, but we can really have probably a good idea of what was going on. There's a lot of songs that make sense in this call and response type of tune that characterizes the blues. So I'm going to show us just a holler, this is called, and what this is a leader. So what you would have is people would be out on the plantation, and maybe you're all shoveling a trench or something like that. One guy would holler, everybody would dig their shovel at the same time and holler back, and this would make work seem more tolerable. It would make the day go by a little bit faster. It would give you something to do to not focus on work. So just take a listen to this channel. I'll only just play a little bit of this to get us into an idea of sort of what I'm talking about here. Alright, so there's just a sample, and you sort of get the idea. This is a song about a woman that, this is just gives people who are out working something to think about. And you hear that clicking in the background, that's actually the hose hitting the ground. And this happened for, you get this from prison crews. That actually is a prison crew right there that was recorded. People out doing road work. Anybody who's doing this coordinated kind of shoveling, digging, all these kind of activities that be coordinated. You just have a song leader who'd give out a shout, people would shout back, and it just made work easier. And then you have other kind of hollers, and here is Son House, who is sort of notorious for drinking a lot. And one thing to think about actually when we're going through this is that the folks who go out and record these people usually have to convince them to be recorded, right? This is early 1920s for a lot of this stuff, early 30s. Black folks in the South just don't really trust white people coming, especially with a bunch of equipment, who want to tell them that they want to record them. Really, they have no experience with this, and it sort of seems weird that they're there. And so there's a lot of people don't really trust them. And so what they do a lot of times is give them a lot of whiskey to get them to record. And here's Son House, who's sort of notorious for drinking whiskey, just giving us another little example of hollers. And again, I'm just going to play a little bit of this just so we get this idea. And this would be the work songs that, it's hard to know, but we could imagine characterize slave plantations even, that we can imagine before the Civil War that this kind of song, this kind of structure was around, something that people did to make work easier. And really think in your own life, I mean, how many people whistle, hum, and sing while they're at work, or just intently think about something else while they're at work to make it a little bit more bearable. And that's what these come from. And then there's some other things that we're going to talk about in a minute that transform these into the tunes. But here's Son House, who's a quick example of hollering, and it's very unstructured. And the beauty of this is you don't really need to know how to play an instrument. You can do the call and response, everybody can join in, and it makes everybody feel good while you're working. So here's some camp hollers from Son House.
Well, if I had a followed, boys, my old second mind, I'd say I'd have been up the country, my old second time.
Yes, yes.
Boy, I'm feeling low down today.
I know you, son. Go sing them old Lady Camp blues. I know you got them. Sing 'em.
Oh, Mr. Charlie, Mr. Ludlow Joe. I done decided, oh boy, I won't work no more.
Oh, look at here. Oh, I'm going to get Lady Camp boat dosha. Lord, for to hold my head.
Flip your horn, boy.
I'm going to get Bulldozer women for to make up my bed.
Hey, get up there, will you?
Well, look at here, boy. That old mule ain't going to get back because you ain't going to drive no more.
I see.
Well, look at here. You got
Hey, I don't want this old levee, boy, till my feet got numb. Boy, if you see Mr. Charlie, ask him, did his money come?
Oh, boy.
All right, so there we get a little bit of example of these camp hollers. And these kind of tunes, well, I guess you wouldn't maybe even call this a tune quite yet, but this is the stuff that builds up the structure along with some of those other things that I mentioned, gospels and things like that. But it's really, really important because it establishes call and response that sticks with the blues, and really it becomes a thing that makes the kind of life that you're living bearable, which is something that we also can think about for the blues. Now, here's something that's interesting, and this, keep in mind when I play this next little example, these bands have all but disappeared. This kind of music does not really exist anymore because people stopped playing the fife, and a fife is like a little flute, and you'll hear it and will recognize this kind of tune. And why would people be playing a fife? Well, one is that all you do is hollow out a stick and make one for yourself, which means that it's affordable, unlike a guitar that needs to be taken care of and needs to have strings on it, needs to be in tune, things like that. You just make different size fifes. If you break it, you go and build a new one. You can put it in your pocket. You can have it there while you're working and pull it out of your pocket when you're done. So this fife tune becomes really popular. But there's something really interesting, and there would be parties, plantation parties, and actually slave owners would encourage their slaves, a lot of times, would encourage their slaves to sing and to have these parties, the jubilees that they were called. Actually, it was partly what the connotation it took on in the United States. A jubilee was actually slaves providing entertainment for white plantation owners who would all get together, and all the slaves would have their layoff time, and they would probably get treated to a hog or some chickens or something like that. But there was these songs, so here's this combination, and really it kind of brings to mind stuff like the national anthem or Yankee Doodle Dandy, the snare drum. So this would be, and this is something, again, I mean, this is recorded long after, but we have the music for songs like the Star Spangled Banner, and we can imagine this is this combination of an African tradition and a European tradition. And like I said, you don't really get to hear this anymore, but this is a fantastic song. And you'll hear some whooping and hollering in the background, and that whooping and hollering is this sort of Arhoolie tradition too, that people would just hoop and holler to have fun, to make their kind of music. So I'm going to give you an example here, and this song is Shortening Hen Duck, and this is Othar Turner, who was one of the last people to really play this kind of music and had been around for a long time. His parents were slaves. So here's Othar Turner playing really something that we probably don't think about at all when we think of the blues, Shortening Hen Duck.
gonna cook some shortbread. Mama gonna cook some shortbread. Grab me the skillet, grab me the leg. Mama gonna cook some shortbread. What did the hen duck say to the drake? No more swimming this lake. Dive on the bottom, cross on the side, come up on the other side.
This is sort of fantastic song, and again you hear references to animals, which is really, really, really common. But and this is another one of those sort of interesting ways that African and European traditions meet. The drum, obviously an African instrument taken away from a lot of slaves. This would be something that, in a time we can't really even hardly envision, before electricity, before motors, before machines, how silent our country was, the world was, that a drum would actually carry. So you would have somebody go out to the highest hill and would pound a drum all day. And when people heard that drum pounding all day, they would go to that place and know that some sort of event was happening, something was happening. It was just you'd pound a drum, and that's that bass drum. So that's sort of this African tradition. You can't get a snare sound really until you add the European element, which is you have to add metal, so you can tighten the drum head down. So of course animal skins were always used for drums, but to get them stretched that thin and that tightly is a European tradition. So again, that's a mix, but that's something that we probably don't really think of when we think of the blues, but yet it's there. And so there you have this kind of the tradition that the things that are going to become the blues grow out of. And one of the things that they really, really grow out of is a European ballad structure that is altered a little bit by black slaves. So to really think about the roots of this music, you have to think that it is African traditions and European traditions that are mixed in a context that makes it make sense for slaves and former slaves to play this kind of tune, and it really becomes its own entity sort of after that. So it's really this combination. But here's this kind of folk tune, and there are many fantastic examples. So here are a couple other things that the blues are built off of. And I'm just going to give you an example here, The Grey Goose, and this is by Leadbelly, who some people may have heard of. A lot of his songs were recorded. He was sort of incredible in the fact that he just knew hundreds and hundreds of songs, like most of these performers, right? To think back in a time before everybody had electricity, that these performers would play for hours and hours and hours on end and would know every kind of song imaginable, but a lot of people just went out and wanted to record them playing the blues, and so we get this idea that they were blues performers, but really folk was really important. Leadbelly is the guy who exemplifies that, and here's this folk song, and it's about this little folk hero. So it's about the gray goose, and you listen to the story of the gray goose. He's shot, he's boiled, he's cut, they feed him to the hogs, nothing can kill the gray goose, and this is really part of that sort of trickster tradition, the little guy getting back, the outsmarting. So here is Leadbelly playing The Grey Goose, which is a quite a fantastic song. Here we go.
One Sunday morning, Lord, 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 preacher went a hunting, Lord, 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 he carried along his shotgun, Lord, 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 long come a gray goose, Lord, 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 the gun went off balloon, Lord, 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 down come the gray goose, Lord, 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 he was 6 weeks of falling, he was 6 weeks of hauling, then my wife and your wife, they give a feather picking. They were 6 weeks of picking. Lord, 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 put him on a pebble. Lord, 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 he was 6 weeks of boiling. And they put him on a table, and the fork couldn't stick him, and the knife couldn't cut him, and they threw him in a hog pen. Lord, 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 the hogs couldn't eat him. Lord, 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 he broke the hog's teeth out. Take him to the sawmill, and the saws couldn't cut him. He broke the saw teeth out, and the last time I seen him, Lord, 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 he was flying across the ocean, Lord, 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 with a long string of quack, quack. And it's hell with the Grey Goose, Lord, Lord, Lord.
Alright, so there is the story of the Grey Goose, which is really, really common. So you have the folk tradition, you have the hollers. Another important element is religion. And if anybody's ever been to a Baptist church, you will know that this is something that is much, much different than a Catholic church or a Christian church. If you go to a Black Baptist service, music is much more important. And really the sermon, and this is something that is a long, long, long tradition. It's really difficult to even separate the music from the sermon. And so actually, you know, a pastor is basically singing, and they get a lot of moans and shouts in the background in response. This is more of this call and response. I'll give you a quick example of, and a lot of people went out to actually record these sermons because it was so different than the traditions of all the people who had access to the recording equipment. And so when people hear this, they go out and try and record it. So here is Reverend Ribbons giving his sermon on hell being a place. And I'll just give you a hint of this, to just listen to this sort of style of speaking and this kind of musical delivery.
There is a hell. Not only is there a hell, but hell is a place and not a state. Can you hear me, Brother Lomax? Hell is a place and not a state. Oh, you know, here lately we've got it so, you know, if you all just hardly can get about, you know, and, you know, you're in a hell of a condition. In the circumstances home, if you ain't got money in the bank and can't wear a full dress and can't put on an evening gown and fishnet stockings with your toe out, you know, you're living in a hell of a condition. The circumstances, baby. But that's not hell. Conditions and circumstances are exponents of hell. But it's not hell. Hell's a long ways down the road from the stop of condition and circumstance. Conditions and circumstances are just stops where the hellish people get on board the hellbound train. You know, some would.
All right, so there is an example of this kind of preaching style that really is sort of musical, call and response, not unlike the chant, that people are expected to shout back, and it's expected to be reflected, the emotion. And as you get to the more important parts of the sermon, it's expected that you're going to get louder and it's going to get more intense, and everybody is going to get more intense around you. So we have, those are the elements, the building blocks. Now, like I said, I keep on saying this, people went out to record this long after it was happening. And so what we really have is recordings from the 20s and 30s, and we have to sort of assume that this had been going on, and there's other circumstantial evidence that lets us sort of assume that this kind of music probably sounded like that since at least the 1890s. And so there's a few things that get us there. Those are the building blocks there, but there's also a lot of social conditions, circumstances that get people into a position to be sort of playing these kind of blues. So first we have to go back to emancipation and then Reconstruction. So slaves are freed, obviously. And then we have a period, a relative freedom for black folks in the South, freed slaves, but it's very, and this is Reconstruction, but it's very, very, very quickly taken away in 1877. Really, it's all of the Northern troops end up leaving the South that allowed this to happen. And so by 1877, it's completely over, and really, there was a relative freedom there, but certainly not ideal. And so it was really tough for slaves when they were freed because people had been denying them skills, education, and whatnot. And it was easy to take advantage of them afterwards, and they had such a tradition in place. It was really hard for people to give up that kind of power. And so we had a system that really sort of reinstated a different kind of slavery, and you could almost argue that it's on some levels more malicious because people didn't have any investment, physical investment in the body. So if a slave dies, you're losing an investment. If you beat a slave till they can't work, you're losing an investment. But if you have a wage worker that you have to pay and they die or they're sick or whatever, you just hire another one. You don't have that investment. And so there's this system, a really cruel system, sharecropping, and this prevails really until the tractor comes along. And in certain parts of the South, this isn't until close to the 1960s, and even really beyond that, people are still engaged in this system. So it's sharecropping. So what that is a black family, and a lot of this is right after slavery, people would stay on the same plantation. People wouldn't get up and run away, and it sounds like you'd want to get up and run away, but that really would make no sense to them. That would be not part of their experience. It's really, really difficult. And, people out there who are 18 or 19 years old, like, how hard is it for you to go away from home when you've got all the advantages, right? And they had zero advantages, and people are out to sort of get them. So really, really tough for them to be mobile, and that's another thing that's going to come up a little bit later. But what happened is black families then would farm a share of the crop, and the plantation owner would furnish all the supplies, right? So these are people who don't have any cash. They're recently emancipated. The plantation owner says, all right, well, I'll give you a mule. I'll give you the tools. I'll give you the seed. I will give you this plot of land, and what you'll do is farm that for me. Then you'll bring in the crops, and then I'll see how much you made against what I gave you, right? But the system was rigged in favor of the owners, right, who actually controlled all of the police and law, all the systems of law in town. And so they could get away with this, but what you would do is you'd know that people were illiterate, you know that the law is in your favor, you're able to keep people permanently in debt. You usually don't even give them cash. Someone will come in to try and figure, and what they'll say is, well, you did a good job here, let me see what you got. You did a real good job farming, but let me weigh it up, and it looks like you just about broke even here. I had to give you that mule, and I had to give you that seed, and so it looks like you broke even. So if you want to make some money, you're gonna have to do it again next season. You're gonna have to stick around, but I'll give you a deal. Since you broke even and you don't have any money, what I'll do is I'll give you some seed, and I'll let you have another mule, and so on. And so they basically trap people on the plantation, and this really is a way to basically re-enslave people. And especially, there's actually, at this time, there are laws after slavery, vagrancy laws and things like that. You wouldn't let people even leave. So during the harvest, if a young, able-bodied black man was found not working during the harvest, a lot of times he'd be arrested for vagrancy, which is basically a crime to arrest able-bodied black men to get them to work, take them to a prison, and then they'd have to get out and work for free. So there's really very little mobility, and so people can't get around very much, which is not surprising. A lot of songs, blues songs, still are about rambling and walking, right? Getting away, about this kind of mobility that they were denied. But what this also does is there is a lot of particular regional styles that develop because people were tied so closely to their plantation, and some musicians would move about from plantation to plantation. But we're talking about a time when nobody has cars. It's tough to get on the train because white police officers would be around train stations, and they would be very suspicious of young, able-bodied black men who would happen to be blues musicians a lot of times, moving about. So it was really, really tough for people to move around, but there were these shared musicians who would go from plantation to plantation who became sort of popular. Charlie Patton was one. Robert Johnson is one of these who probably a lot of people have heard of. So in this late 19th and 20th century, we have this style developing. It doesn't get recorded until much later, but you have this style developing and slowly spreading around in the Delta and in other regions in the South, and you can hear these regional differences. And so really if you think of the early 20th century, there is race records, and it's called the blues, and a lot of these songs are called the blues, but it's really what we'd probably call jazz right now. And it's a vaudevillian tradition. There were a lot of black women who were singing, theater singers who came in and sang, and it was initially marketed for black audiences. So you have Bessie Smith, Mamie Smith, Ma Rainey. They have this jazzy kind of vocal blues, but what also is happening is a parallel development, and no one is really listening to this, are these blues out in the country, out in the Delta, and some people start to sort of discover them and go out and look for them. The Lomaxes, Alan Lomax and his father John, they end up actually contributing 10,000 songs to the Library of Congress, over 10,000 songs to the Library of Congress. They go out looking for these people and trying to record them. And sort of we get this image. Robert Johnson is a particularly good example of this. And so people will call him the king of the Delta blues. Well, there were other people who were just as good as him, who have a bigger recorded output. There's a variety of sort of different reasons that make it so Robert Johnson's famous for this. But really his body of work, he has is 30 songs recorded. Somebody went out to record him, Lomax, and what did they want to record? They wanted him to play the blues. And like I said earlier, these guys could play everything. This guy would play honky-tonk, he'd play hillbilly music, all these things, jazz. And when Robert Johnson died, he was playing electric guitar in a jazz three-piece, right? But we have no idea what that sounds like. We don't think of that because nobody wanted to record him playing that. So the people who went out to record in the Mississippi Delta only wanted these kind of blues, and so that's what we've got, and that's why we sort of think of these people as only blues players. But they really played all sorts of different styles. But now we've got, I'm going to just play some regional examples, and then maybe we'll end getting near the urban blues, and sort of everything kind of changes there. So just to sort of establish this, so let's listen to a couple of these different styles. We've got Delta style, really distinct styles before urban blues, before World War II, basically, and really before the Great Depression, because the Great Depression has a really disastrous impact on the recording industry, and it ruins a lot of independent labels, which is really unfortunate. So then a lot of major labels emerge after World War II, and they really change the shape of this kind of music. So you get a lot of variety and really cool performers from before World War, really in the 20s and 30s, when people were going out making these initial recordings. And so the Delta style is usually characterized by a slide and this kind of sloppiness. And again, like I said, for a lot of people to get recorded, it would take maybe a bottle of whiskey before they'd be willing to do this. And the people who were recording them would like to give them a bottle of whiskey, because then they think that they would get a better performance from them, or they would get better stories from them, right? So these are kind of people doing this sort of weird anthropology out recording. But so you get this style, Delta style, which really is sort of characterized by a kind of sloppiness. And we'll listen to Charlie Patton playing a fantastic song. Then I'll show you a different version of the Delta style, and then we'll play some Texas style, and then the Piedmont, so the sort of Georgia style. But here is some Delta stuff, and we're going to play Charlie Patton, and it's really the rumor. W.C. Handy is a guy who recorded these big orchestras playing this kind of jazzy blues for the race record market and urban market. And the rumor is he was waiting for a train down in Mississippi, and he saw this guy dragging a knife across the guitar strings and playing this low, mournful tune. And really the sort of myth, the rumor, is that Charlie Patton was the guy who was playing this. And here is, and he was around, and was finally recorded in the 20s and in the 30s, but he had been playing for 20 or 30 years, and so it's kind of like a living document of what stuff might have sounded like in the 1890s. So here's Charlie Patton playing Jesus is a Dying Bed Maker. Another thing, too, is these guys oftentimes are really close to the church, because that is where a lot of people learn how to play music, and that is where a lot of people learn how to sing, and that's where a lot of people learn how to play guitar. That's where a lot of people got instruments, and it was just really central to black life in the South anyway. So here's Charlie Patton, Jesus is a Dying Bed Maker.
I want my feet to be bold. It's all right. what you to do for me. Come and lay it on the cool and blue. Go straight out on him.
To get to some other examples, I'm going to cut that one short, but you sort of get this, it's the one guy and his guitar, even though sometimes they're so good at playing guitar, it sounds like two. The slide, sloppy, zero structure. A lot of these guys are sort of, it's songs that they always play, and they just kind of make them up as they go. They have these sort of base sets of lyrics that they can throw in any song, but really like this structureless kind of song all over the place. Now here is a really extremely typical kind of blues song, which becomes actually the standard, is this AAB format, is two lines, two of the same lines, followed by a line that rhymes. And this is a perfect example of that song. And here's another little bit of the Delta style. So I'm going to play Sleepy John Estes' Floating Bridge for another little piece of the Delta.
Now I never will forget that floating bridge. Now I never will forget that floating bridge. Now I never will forget that floating bridge. Tell me 5 minutes time on the water I was here. When I was gold ran down, I thought of my hand. Please take me on dry land.
So you get that pattern there, and again you've got this guy playing guitar. There you have a harmonica, which would be a really typical accompaniment because it's an easy instrument to carry around. So that's the Delta style. A little bit sloppier, a little bit less structured. That right there is a later tune, a lot more of a structure to it. But here's now another example, Texas style, which was really sort of developed in a different context. And certainly there's slavery and racism and all those sort of common factors, but you listen to the arpeggios here and you can very, very, very much hear the influence of Mexican music. The corrido is like this sort of Mexican ballad. Very, very much hear that in the song, and this is the song Black Snake Moan by Blind Lemon Jefferson, and some people maybe have heard of the movie by the same name, but here is Blind Lemon Jefferson playing Black Snake Moan, and just listen to this difference, difference in style, difference in notes even though there's a lot of similarities.
Told me late last night, you don't need no mama no now. Black snake crawling in my room. Black snake crawling in my room. And some pretty mama had better come in. Get this black snake too.
So there you go. You hear that much different style, different turnarounds. Very, very much influenced by the music going on around him, and the sort of corrido form. So he's got this kind of Mexican flair, actually, even though it's a straight up blues. So you get this kind of idea of these different sounds that are going on at the same time. Now here is an example of the Piedmont style, one of my favorite songs, and really the best version of this song, much better than the Allman Brothers version, I would say, that came along much later. Blind Willie McTell, a very prolific singer, was recorded doing a lot of gospel tunes. Had done all sorts of different kinds of gospel. And here he is, and this is one of the difference. So it's much crisper, a much cleaner style than the Delta. Not as many slide accompaniments, and he's playing on a 12-string guitar, and a lot of people actually in the Piedmont are playing on a 12-string guitar, so you get a bigger booming kind of a sound, and this is just such a beautiful song, so I may have to just play the whole thing because it's a couple minutes. Blind Willie McTell playing the Statesboro Blues, a beautiful version.
Wake up, mama, turn your lamp down low. Wake up, mama, turn your lamp down low. Have you got the nerve to drive Papa McTell from your door? My mother, daddy left me reckless, my daddy left me wild, wild, wild. Mother, daddy left me reckless, daddy left me wild, wild, wild. No, I'm not good looking, but I'm some sweet woman's angel child. She's a mighty mean woman, do me this away. She's a mighty mean woman, do me this away. When I leave this town, pretty mama, I'm gonna wait to stay. I love the woman better than I'd ever seen. I once loved a woman better than I'd ever seen. Treated me like I was a king and she was a doggone queen. Sister, tell your brother, brother tell your auntie, now auntie tell your uncle, uncle tell my cousin, now cousin tell my friend. Run up the country, mama, don't you wanna go? May take me a fair brown, may take one or two more. Big 80 left Savannah, going and did not stop. You ought to saw that color fireman when he got them ball of hot. You can reach over in the corner, mama, and hand me my traveling shoes. You know about that, I've got them Statesboro Blues. Mama, sister got 'em, auntie got 'em, brother got 'em, friend got 'em, I got 'em. Woke up this morning, we had them Statesboro Blues. I looked over in the corner, grandma and grandpa had 'em too.
Fantastic tune, and really you've got to think it's great. Those are the kind of blues that are contagious. The whole entire family gets them, gets the Statesboro Blues. But so there we went through some of the regions. This is probably a pretty good place to leave it. So you hear that Piedmont sound, Delta sound, Texas sound, much different, and really there are some other things, some sort of more nefarious elements. When producers come in, when people start making a lot more money off of this, that's when you sort of get a standardization. And so there's a lot of variety, and I recommend anybody out there to go and check out many of these 30s, 20s, and 30s blues recordings are absolutely fantastic. There's so much variety and so many good songs there that really have sort of been kind of erased from the popular memory. But I'm going to close it down there, and next week I believe I will have a special guest joining me to take care of some of this, getting us up to the present. So we'll do the transition to the urban blues to carry us kind of up to the present, as it were, with this kind of music. So thanks for listening, everybody out there. I hope you enjoyed the program. As always, come on down to River West Film and Video and get your videos here, because they have an awesome selection, wonderful movies. It's a great environment, so please come down here and get your films from here. And as again, the disclaimer, this was my show, John Terry. I'm the producer. That was my views, and all opinions and quotations did not represent River West Radio, my responsibility, and River West Radio is not liable for any legal issues arising from the content of this program. Thank you, and I will see you all next week.